we're going to delve into VivaCitadel,
Yeah.
which is our product that we're developing for the intelligent city and living lab space.
Correct.
And you just so happen to be the right man to talk to about that.
I sure hope so.
So perhaps you could just firstly tell me what is VivaCitadel
Mm-hmm.
and what we hope it can do.
Yeah, definitely. Cities are incredibly diverse in terms of what an actual day-to-day might look like for any given employee, right? It's so broad. And yet, as technology continues to evolve and things like, AI start to become more and more a topic, a lot is said about data, right? And making data-driven decisions. That tends to be a bit of a buzz phrase, if you will, that we hear a lot. And VivaCitadel is trying to play in this space in the following way. Let's imagine you're an employee and you need to make a decision about, let's say, how often would you like to irrigate the soccer fields in the city? Well, you need to make that decision, and you could just take a guess, right? And just like, well, it's a little too much right now, so I'll decrease it a bit and hope for the best, or I'll increase it a bit if it's too low. But ultimately, if you want to, make a data-driven decision, you are somebody who's in need of some data, right? What's our state of our soccer fields, right? Are there soccer fields that require less irrigation, others that require more? Perhaps there's areas where there's more rain, and there's just a number of information items that you might need in order to make that decision as best you can. And yet, if you're a city employee, the process whereby you need to find that data is pretty ill-defined. Like it's very human oriented in the sense that you would need to find people and start shooting some emails and start escalating things throughout the organization and try and find somebody who might have a data set on rainfall data for particular areas, or even the specific locations of all of the soccer fields in the city and all of that stuff. And this problem compounds if you're somebody who's a little bit higher level in terms of strategic direction setting in the city, where you might have to look at a number of areas. It's not just soccer fields, but all of a sudden it's all of the parks and it's all of the infrastructure, and it's thinking of, what do the water lines look like, so that we can, where would it be feasible for us to change the irrigation system, for example. So the more high level you are, the more vast the pool of data that may be of use to you is. The other problem with the city being so diverse with these different services is that such a large cities, typically they're such large organizations that they end up with these different silos, right? You've got the people who look after infrastructure, you've got the people who look after parks, you've got the people who look after IT, and that spans across several different lines of business and throughout the different departments of the city. Now, historically, these people have all solved their tech and data problems with their own solutions, right? So you, in operations, you have your problems and you'll procure your own solutions and you figure that out. And then you in IT will do the same for your problems. But when you're looking at these issues that are pretty holistic, right? Not just things like strategic direction setting for the city, but when you think of wicked societal problems, right? Climate change and stuff like that, none of us can meaningfully solve world hunger, climate change, like big problems like that. And they're multifaceted. So you need these different silos of information to somehow talk to one another. And that doesn't exist today. It costs cities a ton of money to have people navigate through these internal channels. There's a ton of resistance there. And it's just missed opportunity for innovation.
So VivaCitadel, it's a web-based platform.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could just sum up very quickly into 2 or 3 bullet points about what it hopes to achieve, perhaps you could do that.
Yeah, for sure. I think first bullet point, single search interface for all the data repositories across the city. I think that's really the key driver of what we're trying to build is to, this is the missing piece so far, right? There's a ton of inventories for these individual silos, but single search interface for all of the silos. I think that's critical. I think the second part that's critical to VivaCitadel is the ability for the city to retain control of who has access to these things, right? Not only internally, because even if information isn't legally speaking private, it may be considered sensitive. And so the city needs to be able to retain these permissions. And when we're talking about external access too, right? That's huge. And I would say a third very important bullet is the ability to generate non-tax revenue, right? most of the people that we speak to, that we have spoken to within cities so far, they've brought up the problem around resourcing, right? Talent, especially in the technology space, and people who can drive forward sort of these more innovative projects. It's not cheap, it's not plentiful, and it can be hard to attract when you're kind of a rigid public entity, right? You're bound by a number of rules and regulations. And so trying to create an opportunity for the city to generate revenue through value-added services beyond just charging citizens more and more tax, that creates opportunities to not only fund some very interesting initiatives and help maybe in some ways address the resource issue that we see in cities.
So we're currently going through the process of building out our MVP.
Yes.
Tell me what this first version MVP will offer and be like for our clients.
Yeah, good question. I think something that's really important to just get out there is that our MVP is probably going to be bad in a number of ways. I think any good MVP, in the sense of the word, is probably really bad. There's this example that I've heard before where, when you're building a product, you want to find a problem that is basically like people having their hair on fire, where it's really uncomfortable and you really need to solve it. And if your hair is on fire, and I were to build an MVP to solve that, most people might say, well, just, a glass of water or a bucket of water or a hose or something along those lines. But that's not true. Like an MVP, when your hair is on fire, is like, here, take this brick, and if your hair is actually on fire, you would gladly take that brick and start going like, please get this off me, right? So I think there's a real art in terms of trying to build an MVP, knowing that it's going to be horrible in many ways. But the key point of it is trying to validate, like, is this enough of a hair on fire thing where you're willing to bash your head in with a brick in the process of trying to find some solution to it. And I think we've definitely hit that with this direction that we're going in for the VivaCitadel MVP. Now, what the MVP is focused around is going back to somebody who needs data and some data that lives somewhere, building somewhat of a beaten path between these two. And our focus for that is going to be initially around SharePoint. So SharePoint, document management system, right? Big Microsoft product. Most of the cities that we're aware of are Microsoft or Azure shops. So it makes a ton of sense to start there. And using this product ourselves, I mean, some of the consulting work that we do with First Nations organizations is around sort of, helping them migrate to one of these solutions and helping to put that in place from the start. Looking at what it offers, it's almost built with silos in mind, right? You get to build these different sites and these different things so that you can control who has access to what. And I think that makes a ton of sense. But what we're trying to do is kind of undo that in a controlled and managed way, whereby we can conglomerate or get these different silos together so that you can have an initial point for your search, right? So basically, for the MVP, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at several resources scattered around several different SharePoint sites in no particular great state of organization, and providing our MVP users with the ability to search for resources within all of those in one place.
Awesome. And I assume we're not endorsing people hitting themselves over the head with a brick.
No, I would not recommend.
Okay,
yes.
Just check. Good. Let's go build it.
Yeah, let's do it.